powerful, you cannot be a victim, you can only be a victimizer. If you are powerless, you cannot be a victimizer, you can only be a victim. So when 9/11 happened, America could not be the victim. America had to be the culpable party because America is powerful and the Muslims or the third world are powerless and therefore they must be victims, not victimizers. Even when a minority described as such as a victim group is doing something threatening or wrong, it can't be at fault because it is a victim. And this is one of the most terrible things about the doctrine of multiculturalism, that it reverses victim and victimizer and turns the whole debate on its head. People wrongly assume that multiculturalism is the equivalent of being tolerant. That they think that multiculturalism means just being nice to other people from different faiths, different cultures, being tolerant. And they think, therefore, if you're opposed to multiculturalism, as I am, then you must be intolerant. This, in my view, is completely wrong. In fact, the reverse is the case. Multicultural is not about tolerance. It's not about living with other people from other faiths. If it was, I would certainly support it. That's the way I live my life, and that's the way I think we should all live our lives. Multiculturalism is different. Multiculturalism is a revolutionary doctrine which says, as its cardinal tenet, that the values of any minority designated as a victim group, powerless, must be given equal status to the values of the majority. The values of the majority, therefore, cannot be upheld if they conflict with the values of this minority. Now, therefore, if you're a multiculturalist, a real multiculturalist, it follows that you can't uphold, for example, the values of the majority in the West, which are bedrock values, such as, for example, the equality of women, such as, for example, monogamy, such as, for example, freedom of speech against the giving of offence. You can't uphold those things. Because multiculturalism says that if you're a minority, and the minority says, well, we have a different view of women, and we don't approve of freedom of speech if it's insulting our religion, and so on, then the minority wins. So it's a revolutionary doctrine. It means that we can no longer uphold, in fact, the values of our liberal, tolerant society. And that is the truth about multiculturalism. It is a profoundly intolerant doctrine which basically says that a majority culture is not entitled to express itself and to express its values. So multiculturalism has had appalling effects in Britain. One of the effects, as I've just said, is to reverse victim and victimizer, so that when we are blown up by suicide bombings, we say it's our fault, and it's created a kind of paralysis that you can't even talk about these things. It also plays directly and disastrously into the core Islamist delusion, which itself reverses victim and victimizer as an intrinsic part of what Islamism is all about. Islamism believes, as I've said, that the West has a conspiracy to destroy Islam. This is untrue, but that's what they believe. And therefore they believe that that the acts that we say are their unwarranted aggression, for example, 9/11, 7/7, they think that these are acts of legitimate self-defense because they are under attack. They are simply defending their culture. And they similarly believe that our legitimate acts of self-defense are proof that that we are out to destroy Islam, proof that we are aggressive. So you have this real dialogue of the demented, based on this fundamental untruth, this fundamental confusion between victim and victimizer, brought about by this lethal combination of Western multiculturalism and Islamist victim grievance culture. And instead of Britain saying, look, this is completely mad, we're not going to have this discussion any more than we'd have discussion with somebody who was literally mad, because you can't have this discussion because it's crazy. Instead of saying that, and instead of saying we're not going to be blackmailed and held to ransom by this, we not only don't say that, but we go along with it because we have ourselves incorporated this victim culture more generally. Minorities, all kinds, are now held to trump values of the majority. And you can't speak against it without being called some kind of bigot. So we're halfway there anyway. And of course the Islamists realize this and play upon it because they're not stupid. They're much more shrewd than we are. Now, our establishment in Britain is privy to all these delusions and excuses. And our establishment, our political and security establishment in Britain, refuses to accept that we are indeed subjected to a jihad or a religious war. And instead, They say that terror is rooted in discrete, specific geopolitical grievances around the world. Islamism, therefore, is driven by grievances such as Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, Kashmir, Chechnya, Bosnia, a whole bunch of grievances. That's what's driving the jihad. And that we will only resolve the problems of Islamist terrorism against the West once we sort out those grievances. In my view, it's completely the wrong way around. We will only solve the grievances, we'll only solve the conflicts around the world once we take on and defeat and destroy the Islamist terror that is driving them. But the government of Britain doesn't think that, and consequently has taken, in my view, a very disastrous turning. It has said it intends to combat Islamist extremism against Britain by tackling the underlying causes, which it identifies as British foreign policy. In other words, the grievances around the world, the conflicts around the world, we've got to change our view, our policy towards those conflicts. It's driven by discrimination, poverty, Islamophobia, and all the rest of it. And so instead of challenging this demented grievance culture which is driving the jihad, our government in Britain is choosing to endorse it. It's choosing to appease Islamist radicalism. It thinks that by making nice noises in its direction, it can draw the sting. So we now have Sharia-compliant mortgages, tentative plans to stop the forced marriages, in inverted commas, of 14-year-old girls being shipped abroad to Pakistan or wherever. That's been withdrawn on the grounds that it might upset the Muslim community. And our police now make their intelligence about Islamist terrorists in Britain available to the Muslim community before undertaking any anti-terror raids in order to ask their permission. It has brought radical Muslims who support the aims of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood for 50 years has been engaged in a campaign to Islamize Europe. It's brought radical Muslims who support the Muslim Brotherhood into the heart of government to serve as advisors to the British government on how to deal with Muslim terrorism. And on the site of the Olympic Village, it's allowing to be built, what is purported to be the largest mosque in Europe, which will serve the purpose of, when Britain is showcased as being the host of the Olympics in 2012, will give the message that Islam is now the dominant religion in Britain, because the largest mosque in Europe will be next to the Olympic Stadium. And this mosque is being funded by the Tablighi Jama'at, which has been said by the FBI and the French intelligence service to be the antechamber to Al-Qaeda and the most significant recruiters to Al-Qaeda in Europe. Now, there has been, as I've said before, a bit of a change of mood in Britain. Last October, the government actually provoked what became an enormous debate about the propriety of Muslim women wearing the niqab, that is the veil that covers the entire face apart from a slit for the eyes, whether it was appropriate and right for women to wear that veil in certain public circumstances, like teaching classes of children who couldn't speak English properly. And this produced an enormous debate, which I thought was in many ways, took rather strange and surreal and bizarre turns, but nevertheless the important thing was we were having the debate at all. This was a great moment, because until that time we had told ourselves that any religious practice could not possibly be criticised without ourselves being accused of prejudice. And we all sat round congratulating ourselves in wonderment that we were actually having this debate. So that was, I thought, a movement in the right direction. So these are various straws in the wind to give you some indication of, in a state of great confusion and uncertainty, that there are a few changes taking place on the ground, and politicians are responding on the business of how should a liberal society react to this problem that we have? We want, on the one hand, to be tolerant and to be accommodating to religious minority practices, which indeed we should. We want to show respect, which indeed we should. And on the other hand, we want to draw the line because we think it's not right and it's a bit dangerous and we're a bit worried if our fundamental Western precepts are basically going down the plug. And we don't really know how to draw these lines. So we're uncertain, we're unsure, but we're beginning to put our toes in the water and have this debate, which is good. Those of us who have seen nothing like this until very recently take heart from that. However, there are two related issues which are central to Britain's failure to understand the jihad against the West. And on those two related issues, Britain is lurching from irrationality into something worse. And those two related issues are the issues of Israel and America. It is, in my view, impossible to exaggerate the degree of hostility to America and the hatred of Israel now coursing through Israel. Israel fundamentally is believed to be the core of the problem of the Islamic jihad against the world. The thinking is this: Israel is the core of the problem because Israel has prevented Israel itself represents the colonization of an Arab country by a foreign European body which was, for reasons of guilt after the Holocaust, put into an Arab country called Palestine. This, of course, is historically wrong in every single respect, but this is what people believe because they are ignorant. Furthermore, Israel is now preventing the legitimate expression of Palestinian nationalism, and as a result, this is the cause of Muslim rage around the world. This is also factually untrue, but let's put that to one side. This is what people believe. America goes this thinking, brought 9/11 on itself, simply because it is supporting Israel. Britain is only under threat now from the Islamic Jihad because Tony Blair has supported George Bush. That's broadly the theory, and it brings together left and right. Now, it's demonstrably absurd, of course, this idea that Israel is at the heart of the jihad. I mean, what on earth has Israel got to do with the attempts to Islamize Asia, the attempts to Islamize Africa, the persecution of Christians across Africa, in Nigeria, the genocide in the Sudan? Forget Darfur, the 20-year genocide in the Sudan, in the southern Sudan. Absolutely nothing. Nevertheless, Israel is well on the way to being completely delegitimized on Britain. It is considered as being on a par with apartheid South Africa, to which it is often compared. And if you're sitting there thinking, my God, Britain really has had it, what an appalling state of affairs, I would remind you that you've got Jimmy Carter. Britain believes that Israel is the regional bully because Britain has actually absorbed the Islamic and Arab narrative about the Middle East, which is basically based on lies from start to finish. The hysteria about Israel continues to escalate. The Lebanon War last summer was depicted as an unwarranted aggression by Israel, and people demonstrated on the streets of London with placards saying, "We are all Hezbollah now." Now, it's one thing thinking mistakenly, in my view, that Israel's behavior was disproportionate, wrong, whatever. It's another thing saying we are all Hezbollah now. I mean, Hezbollah, the army of Iran, an army of Iran, is pledged to destroy the West, not just Israel, the West. What are they saying? We're all Hezbollah now. Are they mad? But that's what they were saying. Before Christmas, the BBC, which every day tells everybody that America is the fount of evil, basically, the Middle East editor of the BBC, Jeremy Bowen, in a briefing for BBC staff, blamed Israel for what? For the violence between Fatah and Hamas. It's Israel's fault. Okay? It's Israel's fault. Israel is the scapegoat of choice for the fashionable world of Britain. The Archbishop of Canterbury, talking about the undoubted parlous position of Bethlehem's Christians before Christmas, blamed Israel. He said, "I would like to know how much it matters to the Israeli government to have Christian communities in the Holy Land. Are they an embarrassment, or are they part of a solution?" That's a question. That's a question. He never asked himself why it was, if Israel has driven out the Palestinian Christians from Bethlehem, why he didn't refer to the persecution of Christians by Muslims worldwide. He never asked himself whether the flight of the Christians from Bethlehem might have anything to do with the Palestinian Muslim government of Bethlehem, administration in Bethlehem. He never asked himself why, if this was the case, the only country in the Middle East where Christians have thrived and have quadrupled in number in the last half century is Israel. And he never asked himself the even more basic question that if it is the wall, if it is the checkpoints, if it is the economic repression and the military oppression by Israel against Palestinian Christians in Bethlehem, why it wasn't the case also that Palestinian Muslims weren't driven out from Bethlehem? Or possibly the Archbishop of Canterbury thinks that Israel has some particular problem with Christians. Clearly, it was rubbish from start to finish. It made no sense whatsoever. However, in churches up and down the land, before Christmas, the traditional